The Visual Gameplay Update Initiative has been one of the most integral programs in modernizing League of Legends. Throughout the course of well over a decade at this point, dozens upon dozens of champions have been reimagined, reskilled, and redesigned to be given fresh new abilities and gameplay with the idea that it will make the champion feel better to play, have more agency in carrying games, and perhaps be a bit more intuitive to pick up and not just a really janky mess. While most of them turned out for the better, and by a significant margin at that, a few of those experiments would expectedly not turn out all too great, either because they missed the mark on addressing their issues, or they did fix the previous issues of the champion only for new ones to come about as a result of their newfound capabilities. Still though, it usually resulted in a net positive for the champion and for the game. Rarely if ever was the champion design team forced to go back on a champion completely. The one time they ever did so being LeBlanc, who to this day is the only champion to ever get reverted in League's history. Having said that, there were a few other champions that had to get parts of their gameplay turned back a bit, and one in particular I want to look into is everyone's favorite kitty cat, Rengar. For today's episode of the Rework Retrospective, we'll be looking at their Pride Stalker's old kit, then take a look at the new kit he got before it was ultimately scrapped and why it had to be scrapped. Among the assassin archetype, no one had quite the gameplay experience that Rengar did. The class by nature is designed to be evasive and quick, having strong burst damage and low durability to force players to make use of that evasion as their primary means of defense. However, in the spirit of keeping things fair for the opposing side, even the most broken assassins in the game give the opposing player some semblance of a fighting chance to survive or outplay them, no matter how minuscule. Take his arch rival for instance. Kha'Zix does a shitload of damage if he can land an isolated Q on you, but typically he needs 2 or 3 of them before he can actually take you out completely. It's highly unlikely a single Q does enough damage to rip you to shreds. What made Rengar stand out compared to every other assassin in the game was that he was pretty much the only member of his archetype to ignore that constraint. He was bar none the most bursty assassin in the game, capable of one-shotting you in the most literal sense of the term. He is the only assassin in the game to have his primary source of DPS housed in auto attacks, thus allowing him the ability to layer multiple autos on you in quick succession for near instantaneous bursts. Among other auto attack empowerments, Savagery is actually one of the most underwhelming in the game. All it does is make his next auto attack do slightly more damage than what it would normally do. However, due to his unique ferocity mechanic, an empowered Savagery would make him do significantly more damage in a single attack, and most importantly, Rengar's base and empowered abilities had separate cooldowns, which meant you could press Q twice if the base Q gave him enough ferocity to activate his empowered Q. This combined with his iconic passive Unseen Predator gave Rengar one of if not the fastest burst combo in the game measuring by rotation time. He would dash onto you for an auto attack and then you would press Q to reset his auto attack, which if used at forward ferocity, granted access to an empowered Q for effectively 3 auto attacks in rapid sequence of one another, each one stronger than the last. Like any empowered auto attack, Q resets his basic attack timer, so when he jumps on you, he could auto Q within the span of half a second. But it got even crazier than that. Originally, Rengar's ferocity behaved identically to Pantheon's Mortal Will, wherein there was no duration for how long it would last. Rengar could generate full ferocity by stacking on a minion or monster, and then casually walk around with it available whenever he needed to. There's one more detail I neglected to mention. Rengar's empowered abilities had no cooldown, with the implication that the time it took to generate another 5 ferocity was to serve as a cooldown. But by preparing ferocity ahead of time, and when factoring in the 3 ferocity generated by his Q, W, and E, along with the residual ferocity accumulated after using his ultimate, Rengar had not 2 casts of Savagery, but 3. Before jumping on his target, you would cast an empowered Q to consume ferocity, then mid-jump you would buffer Bullet Strike, and right as soon as your empowered Q went through, you'd press W, which had no cast time, and use Q again, during which you'd be able to get the last couple ferocity from your ultimate buff to then get a second empowered Q right away, leading to the infamous triple Q one-shot combo that Rengar mains took full advantage of to deal north of 2,000 damage in half a second to a second at most. With how fast he could rush you down and the bulk of that DPS being point-and-click autos, Rengar's burst rotation was by far the most difficult to avoid. You had quite literally half a second to a second at best to react, and that's assuming you somehow managed to withstand a base Q and empowered Q. Oftentimes he didn't even need another empowered Q to finish off a squishy. Further frustrating the experience of fighting him was the fact that you couldn't stop him from leaping onto you until the instant he did, giving you basically 0 time to react and respond to him. Prior to getting reworked, Rengar's ultimate stealth was invisibility, full-on invisibility. He could be standing right the fuck next to you and you couldn't figure out exactly where he would be. While true, enemy champions would be alerted to Rengar being nearby them, that was hardly of any help to them as Rengar would alert all enemies nearby. The current Rengar puts an icon over the champion he's closest to, giving the opposing team some semblance of proximity awareness. With old Rengar Ultimate, not only would he be straight up invisible, but you had no idea who he was targeting since an exclamation point would be above everyone. Simply put, the only true counterplay you had against Rengar save for loading up on pink wards was the literal half a second you had from the moment he jumped on you to the moment your health bar dropped to 0. Next to no other champion had the same kind of instant one-shot potential that Rengar carried, thankfully. Effective as it was, the whole reason behind the Assassin rework in 2017 was to make them less polarizing to deal with. With how Rengar was designed, he'd be rendered functionally worthless if he failed to kill his target because the rest of his kit wasn't all that useful in doing just about anything. If he was able to get fed, Rengar would be the most difficult assassin to shut down because of how much tempo and rushdown potential he had. However, it came with a stipulation that Rengar had to get fed. Bone-Tooth Necklace offered a series of permanent buffs to Rengar based on the number of takedowns he acquired, ranging from increased jump distance to longer ultimate stealth duration to even faster movement speed. But those would be rendered inaccessible if Rengar fell behind, because he wouldn't be able to score takedowns, and even if he did, 20 combined kills and assists is a pretty tall task to expect out of a Rengar player with every single game. So for better or worse, this guy had one job. Done properly, he was the best at doing said job, no mistake, but not only was he prone to getting circumstantially wrecked, the upside to letting him do what he wanted to do was so detrimental for the enemy team's experience on account of practically negating their agency in doing anything to stop him. The purpose of his mid-scope was to accomplish 3 things. 1. Make him less one-shotty, counterintuitive as that sounded. 2. Make him more consistent so that he isn't feast or famine and therefore a less polarizing experience. And 3. Give him more options to where he doesn't get hard countered in certain matchups. They basically had the same design philosophy in mind for Rengar as they did for the other assassins like Katarina, Talon, and such. The goal was to introduce more methods of counterplay by the opposing team, while at the same time compensating by making the assassins more multidimensional. Despite only really changing one ability in use, I would argue Rengar was given more changes than that of any other assassin except maybe Talon. Before discussing the ability that's on everyone's mind, I'm sure, let's talk about everything else that got reworked in line with the 3 things I talked about earlier. First of all, we have Bone-Tooth Necklace. Rather than locking away all the passive benefits in Rengar's passive, they decided to incorporate them into his base kit. For example, the 125 bonus jump range at 6 trophies turned into his default attack range and brushes. The extra 5 seconds of his ultimate was added to his base kit, turning from 7 seconds to 12 at rank 1 and scaling by 4 per rank. In place of the utility, his Bone-Tooth Necklace was adjusted to only require a takedown of each member of the enemy team, making it so he could realistically max out his necklace much more consistently per game, seeing as the amount of total kills he needed went from 20 to potentially just 5. Also, it would simply give Rengar passive bonus attack damage. You might be thinking, how in the hell was that balanced? They gave him all this stuff unconditionally and then gave free bonus AD on top of that. How is that fair? As a compromise, ferocity no longer holds indefinitely, and this ultimate no longer generates additional ferocity, making it no longer possible for Rengar to do the triple Q rotation unless he was already in combat beforehand. Again though, that was a deliberate move by Riot's part to condense his power and make him more accessible. Prior to that, Rengar depended on double empowered abilities for the bulk of his passive. Now, however, you can get a similar amount with only one cast of his base and empowered Q. It wouldn't give you quite as much as 1 base and 2 empowered, but certainly more than 1 base and 1 empowered before he got reworked. A much higher floor at the cost of a lower ceiling. Or that was the intention at least. Alongside the changes to his passive, his ultimate received the all too necessary change to make it camouflage instead of invisibility, which if you ask me makes total sense. No one should be able to have increased tempo and blanket stealth for more than a second or 2 at most, but of course, they wanted to compensate by giving it the aforementioned longer duration at base, as well as unconditional movement speed as opposed to only when moving towards enemies. Further, while it no longer provides bonus movement speed and ferocity generation after the fact, what it did have was an empowered auto attack that did 200% AD in total, as well as an armor shred debuff on the target. Then second to last was the new Battle Roar. Rather than giving him bonus armor and magic resist, Battle Roar was made so Rengar would be able to recover a portion of all damage taken within a short period of time, giving him surprisingly strong burst resilience in that double casting Battle Roar would recover all damage taken within 1.5 seconds. A big weakness old Rengar had was how badly vulnerable he was if he got caught out, lacking the same escape options you see on other assassins who could use their mobility either as a means of attack or escape. Additionally, his empowered W was a QSS, and initially after getting reworked he would become crowd control immune for a short while after. Battle Roar lost a fair bit of general utility in that it no longer gave tank stats nor could it heal you without first taking a beating. But considering how much Rengar can heal off 2 casts of his W, I'd say it's a net positive for him nonetheless. Finally though, and most crucially of all, Savagery, by far the most controversial change in Rengar's kit. In place of an empowered attack, his Q turned into a damaging ability where he would damage everyone in an arc around him before jabbing forward for the same amount, even having a small dash to it. Casting aside the frustration felt by many Rengar 1-tricks, the purpose of his new savagery was abundantly clear. The old savagery was obviously very quick at dispatching targets due in part to being a basic attack. Having a fixed cast time for his new Q made it so you had a little bit longer to react to his combo, along with the fact that it was now a skill shot. In exchange for that, Rengar could now deal AoE damage to enemies, giving him the potential to dispatch multiple enemies at once. The combined properties of his new Battle Roar and Savagery gave Rengar more staying power in a fight, encouraging players to build him more like a bruiser than a one-shot assassin. The issue was that when built this way, Rengar became next to unbeatable in any circumstance. What I mean by that is he was the best bruiser in the game. Unlike other melee fighters who could typically get kited out, so long as he had access to a brush, Rengar was impossible to shake off. He would jump at you 24/7, giving him unbelievable stick potential. Any attempts to trade against Rengar was null and void as well, since he could regenerate half of all damage taken within a short time by pressing W, or regenerate all of it by pressing it twice, not to mention a blanket QSS with even crowd control immunity afterwards. With the changes to Ferocity, he could now achieve an empowered ability every rotation by getting 1 point per ability and his passive, giving him readily available access to any one of his empowered abilities and the surge of movement speed that now came along with casting one of them. All of that was amplified even further by his new Rabadon's Death Cap for AD, making him do extreme amounts of damage in addition to having all this utility. He did way too much damage even without going full DPS, healed for way too much, was so hard to pin down and shut down, and was one of the most mobile fighters in the game. So while the changes made it harder for him to be an actual assassin, the trade-off was that he could do so much more than just assassinate. You could chalk it up to Rengar being simply overtuned, but his new iteration failing had more to it than just mere numbers. Even if you lowered his power level a bit, and they did, several times at that, the functional purpose of his new abilities made him too versatile. Which, I mean, to be fair, that was the goal, to make Rengar less one-dimensional and more capable in different scenarios, but they sort of overcorrected. Or rather not sort of, they definitively did. A curious situation the kitty cat found himself in where by all accounts he was significantly more effective than he was prior, but people were unhappy with how he turned out because they took away the one thing he was known for, even if the champion turned out better from it. The swim Q in particular was just a hard pill to swallow for Rengar 1-tricks, enough to alienate them from wanting to continue playing the guy. It isn't that the ability didn't work, on the contrary, it was effectively his old Q that could now damage multiple enemies and give him better wave clear. It just didn't feel like Rengar. What made the champion appealing was the high skill ceiling it took to execute his rotations properly. The new savagery, combined with no longer being able to get 2 empowered abilities per rotation, made it almost impossible for Rengar to dish out the same kind of burst damage he had before, in addition to the fixed animation making him feel clunky even with the increased tempo he got overall. There had to be some kind of middle ground where he could retain the same kind of one-shotty feel to him back in the day while having the extra options that came with the rework. Well, in just over a year after getting his new version, Rengar essentially got reverted back to his old one. Or should I say his passive, W, E, and ultimate kept the changes they were given, but he basically got his old Q back. Which might have you believing that's kind of broken and that he got his cake and could eat it too. But I actually think this is a healthier balance between his pressure ceiling and versatility. Again, while the swim Q was nowhere near as one-shotty, that didn't mean it didn't do damage. It did a lot of damage, way too much damage. Rendering most if not all of Rengar's pressure to a single enemy was a big reason for why he's quote-unquote fair. The moment he's allowed to kill everyone on the enemy team at once is when things got out of hand. Rengar is an assassin. He plays like an assassin and should feel like an assassin, not a tanky bruiser like how he was built before. And I think overall this was the sweet spot for him. Might have nice to have more options, but still being the one-shot killer everyone hates him for. What do you guys think about Rengar? Do you believe they should have kept his swim Q and made everyone deal with it, or are you glad they brought him back to his old Q? Also, for you Rengar 1-tricks out there, do you like Rengar as he is now, or do you miss the pre-2017 Rengar? They might have the same abilities, but the applications are noticeably different. Either way, let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other Rework Retrospective episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.